Nowadays, I long to burn. Strange, I know. It's just, I mean, have you ever felt so lonely? So lonely that you just wish that you could shut down and die? Well, trust me, I've tried. Apparently, you're only allowed to do that once. But it's just so cold. I hate the cold, yet how I miss the snow right now, or the sun on my toes. Sadly, you can't feel that down here. But I suppose you could probably guess that. In the tight, closed-in space, no room to move. I always thought my boyfriend was a space hogger, that he would be the biggest pain in my life. Always stealing the covers and spreading out so I had no room to stretch myself. Oh, I'd pay anything for that sort of warm, safe little space now. Just that little slither of mattress once more. Anything would be better than here, that's for sure. But, I mean, get over it, right? Can't do anything about it now. Too late. I was a big girl. Unusually so, I'm afraid. Always ate too much. Never did a thing about it. I had this coming. Can't cry over it. Can't moan or whine. It's pretty normal. Happens to everyone eventually. I'm not sad or angry. This part was my choice. Though, a choice I regret. The only thing I regret. It's so dark and cold, like I'm wrapped in black ice. No way of ever feeling the warmth. I can't move. I can barely even turn over in such a cramped little space. And I'm so lonely. I was never expecting this. I never thought that I would have to be this lonely. How I long to see a friendly face once again. Someone, anyone to talk to hold me, to be my friend. Just for a bit, but I know that that'll never happen now. I just wish that this torment would end. It's times like this that I regret what I wrote on that pathetic bit of paper. It's times like this that I really wish that I had chosen to be cremated instead. When I was 14 years old, I received my first cell phone. It was one of the earlier models of phone, small, basic, and a burner. When I was in high school, all the cell phones were able to do were make or receive calls and texts. There weren't cameras or apps or even caller ID built into the phones. All of the older technology now seems so simple and innocent in comparison to today's models. I used my phone pretty frequently, texting friends or calling home, and I had become familiar with all the incoming numbers that were displayed on my phone screen. After about 6 months, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it, figuring it was the wrong number and didn't think more of it. The next day, the same unknown number called me again. Just as before, I ignored the call. The third day, the same number called me again. This time, I answered quickly with the cliche, "Wrong number," and hung up the phone. A few seconds later, I received a text from whoever it was who kept calling me. The text simply read, "Call me." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who this person was, why they wanted to talk to me, or how they got my phone number. For months, I continued to ignore the incoming texts that appeared daily. Each text from the same number with the same message, "Call me." Unable to stand the bizarre messages, I decided to trace the number and finally identified the person who was harassing me. After a few minutes on the internet, I was able to trace the number to an exact location in the town. I arrived at the location only to discover that the number was for a public payphone. I didn't want to give up the search so quickly, so I chose to observe the phone for a while and see if anyone stopped by. I wasted my day watching that phone and seeing absolutely no one even approach the phone. I turned to leave when I received another text. The same text I had had for so many weeks. Call me. It was then I realized that texts cannot be sent from payphones, only other cell phones. I turned around and saw a strange man with a red hoodie pulled up so I couldn't see his face. He was holding a cell phone in his hand and waved at me with the other hand. I was petrified as my mind began racing with questions. Who was this man? Where did he come from? Why was he calling me? How long had he been standing there? Was he there the whole time? Had he been watching me? Too scared to confront the man, I turned and ran as fast as I could home. I told my older brother about what had happened, and he wanted me to take him to the phone. We got in his car and I pointed out the phone on the corner. We got out of the car together. He had a baseball bat in his hands in case anyone tried to mess with us. Checking the payphone, we found that the phone had been tampered with and concluded that the man in red had manipulated the wires, so it looked as though I was receiving calls from the payphone instead of his actual phone. Scratched in the side of the payphone were the words, "Call me." Needless to say, I got rid of my phone and bought a new phone, and with the new number. Life returned to normal for a while after that, but 2 months later, I received another strange text. This time, the text came from my old number and stated, I bought a new phone too. I got rid of the phone and chose to never buy or use one again. Soon, someone began calling my house number and leaving the same message in a hoarse, raspy voice. Call me. I now live without any phone in my life whatsoever. I never called the man, but that has never stopped him from calling me or my family. My life has been average at most. I lived in a family of 2 girls and 1 boy. There was an older sister, Jenny, me, and my younger brother, Alex. We had a typical childhood, I guess. Jenny was popular with her blonde hair, blue eyes, and skinny frame. Alex early on showed a penchant for sports and became the star athlete of the family. But myself, just like the rest of my life, was very average. I wasn't overly smart. I wasn't ugly, but I didn't stand out. I had a small group of friends. I was average. But I idolized my older sister. Jenny was everything I would never be. She had friends upon friends upon friends. She had a string of boyfriends starting from the time she was 11. There was always some boy, some drama. She grew tired of it, but I loved it. Jenny loved me too. We were really close as children. Mom and Dad loved me, sure, but they didn't notice me like they did Jenny and Alex, because there was nothing special about me. Not really. But Jenny didn't see it that way. See, she paid attention to me. She gave me makeovers and taught me about makeup. She used to take me shopping even with her popular friends, and showed me the best clothes to wear for my body shape. She would tell me all about her amazing, glittering life, and she would listen, if and when I found some small contribution to make to our conversation. She was my role model, but sometimes life isn't average. Sometimes it isn't typical. When Jenny was 16 and I was 13, she was found in her room, a bottle of pills spilled out next to her. I don't think they even bothered with much of an investigation. It was clear what she had done, although no one really knew why. Life can be funny that way. Sometimes, it's the ones who seem happy who are struggling the most. It was a very difficult time for my family, but life went on. As I grew older, I grew to love my average life. My parents paid a little more attention to me with Jenny gone. I went to a state university for journalism, where I met my husband Alan. We got married right out of college. I worked for the local paper and he had an office job at a company just a few blocks down the road. Our life was blissful, beautiful, and unremarkable. Until, that is, when I became pregnant. It started when I was about 2 weeks late. I've always been as regular as a clock, but at this time, work was pretty hectic and I wasn't really paying attention. Then, one night, I had a terribly real, terribly strange dream. In the dream, I was in my old childhood room, sitting on the flower pattern comforter on my twin-sized bed, playing with the pacifier for God knows what reason. In walked Jenny. She came and climbed onto the bed. She was toying with an empty pill bottle. She looked into my eyes. I don't know why, but I woke up screaming. To be honest, I hadn't paid much thought to Jenny in years, and I'd never had a dream like that. My husband woke up to comfort me, but I was already on my way to the bathroom. I vomited into the toilet for about 20 minutes, thinking of missed periods, pill bottles, and Jenny. I took a pregnancy test that day. It came out positive. My husband and I were overjoyed. We celebrated with a nice dinner. We called our parents, who were both incredibly excited. We talked about baby names, nursery, and all the things you'd associate with babies. We got to bed late, exhausted but happy, cuddling together like newlyweds, dreaming of little cherubs dancing in our arms. I woke up to see my sister standing next to the bed. If the night before hadn't been frightening, you can't imagine how this felt. Here she was, Jenny, the real, not-so-alive Jenny. She stared down at me. I reached out. I almost felt as though I could touch her, but she turned and walked out of the room. From that day on, Jenny was always there. She was standing next to the bed when I woke up in the morning. She followed me to work. She watched as I picked out baby clothes, occasionally fingering one or two items that she particularly liked. She was always there. Sure, I thought about telling my husband, but what would I say? That his average wife was about to disturb his average life with her newfound ability to see the dead? Unlikely. Rather, I considered it a strange and extraordinary experience in my otherwise unremarkable life. Besides, I enjoyed it in a way. Here was my long-lost sister, my ages ago best friend, the one person I looked up to, the person I wanted to be when I grew up. She was back again. It was comforting to have her there as my stomach grew fat and round, and I began to waddle back and forth trying to control my deranged hormones. Sometimes, she would put her hand on my stomach to feel the baby. When she did, the baby would start to kick. How comforting to know that my baby would share a special connection with Jenny. Jenny was there when my husband drove me to the hospital, crying in the back through the pain of my contractions. She followed us to the maternity ward and stood calmly next to me as I pushed, and pushed. She kept her hand placed on my stomach, and it was a comfort. Then it was over. They placed the baby into my arms, a girl, a wonderful, plump little girl whose cries were the most beautiful thing in the world. Alan and I played with her tiny curling fingers. When I looked to the bedside, Jenny was gone. Now, don't misunderstand. I have always missed my sister. She was very important to me, and I miss her still. But I was somewhat relieved to see her gone. I missed her, but she could never be a part of my life again. Now, I could return to my happy, typical life, my happy life with my happy baby and my happy husband. I was happy for a few weeks before I noticed it. I was playing with little baby Ellen when she looked up at me and I noticed them. Her startling blue eyes. The eyes that neither her father nor I possessed. She looked at me with an eerie calmness. When I looked into her eyes, I saw Jenny. And so, tomorrow morning, I will fall to the floor in an outburst of tears and screams. Alan will frantically dial emergency services as I clutch at the body of my child. When the EMTs arrive, they will pry the cold, lifeless body from my embrace, and I will collapse into Ellen's arms. I will be sad. I will miss her, just as I missed Jenny. But Jenny can never be a part of my life again, no matter how much she wants to be. After all, it took me years to be rid of her the first time. Two years ago, a bunch of my friends and I went on a school-sponsored trip to Alaska set up by the Pursuit Institute. I was placed in a group with 10 other students and 2 adult chaperones. Another group was made up of similar numbers, and each group would start at one location, and then we would switch places halfway through. The trip would consist mostly of hiking and backpacking in Denali, where we would camp in tents, and then hiking near the Kenai Peninsula, where we would stay in a cabin. We arrived in Anchorage at about 2 in the morning, but it was still light out as Alaska never really got dark that time of year. Our groups parted ways after claiming our baggage, and my group began our trip by driving to Denali National Park, where we would be spending the next several days. We all had a great time, and before we knew it, it was time to meet up with the other group and trade places for the second half of our trip. We converged in front of a supermarket, and then 2 groups swapped stories and shared some laughs. It was all fun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the other group. Their stories would be incredibly vague, or they would just stop halfway through as if they caught themselves from mentioning something without even realizing it. It was all incredibly eerie, but no one seemed to mention or notice. When I tried to question them further or go into detail about their trip, they would simply become dazed and just say that it was all really just a blur. Then, getting defensive, they would ask about details about our trip so far. I scoffed and tried to remember a specific event only to find that I really didn't remember much either. In fact, as I began listening to my group's own stories, we were being just as vague as them. It was also strange that no one, not even I, immediately noticed that the other group was short 1 kid. Suddenly, though, it hit me. "Where's Josh?" I asked the other group. Everyone turned to face me. Their eyes seemed glazed and cloudy as their faces reflected my own confusion right back at me. What they said next made my blood run cold. With such genuine seriousness that it couldn't have possibly been a joke, one by one, they asked, "Who the hell is Josh?" Even the adults looked puzzled. Giving a nervous laugh, I turned to my own group for support, only to see that they were looking at me with the same expressions. Confusion was plastered across every one of their faces, looking at me with blank eyes. Then, suddenly, confusion turned to laughter, as if they realized that I had been joking. "Ha, nice man. You had me going for a second there," Matt said as the mood quickly lightened back up. I laughed with them and pretended that it had been a joke, but all I felt was a horrible sickness rising up inside me. That's when a kid from the other group said, "Haha, but seriously, what's with your group?" You guys are acting all weird, and where is Sarah? Ha, very funny. Yeah, real original. Members of both groups snapped back at him, almost in unison. No one named Sarah has ever been in our group, and even I was pissed that he was making fun of me. That is, until I saw the look on his face. When no one took him seriously, his appearance was bleached to a deathly pale tone, and his eyes widened, shifting from side to side nervously. Then he looked at me. Our eyes met, and we both knew that something was horribly wrong. Although we really couldn't be sure that the other was telling the truth, we both seemingly knew someone who had now been forgotten. We simply stood there for what felt like forever, staring at each other. He looked horrified, and I'm sure I did too. Before I got a chance to talk to him, however, we were shoved into separate cars and were on our way to our new destinations. Their group went to Denali, ours went to the cabin. I doubted talking to him would have done any good anyways. What could either of us have said? He didn't remember Josh, and I sure as hell didn't know anyone named Sarah. The more I thought about it, the more I began to convince myself that it must have been a joke by everyone to screw with me. A group joke that everyone was in on, except for me. Josh was probably hiding in the car, laughing his ass off. I felt like such an idiot for believing that that other kid had experienced what I had when he was really just flat out mocking me, in front of everyone. I buried my face in my hands. Part of me was angry, but I was mostly relieved. It certainly made more sense to think that it was all a joke on me. I was actually impressed that they got the adults in on it too. But overall, I was still pretty pissed, and I decided that the next time I saw the kid who mocked me, I would punch him straight in the face. How dare he mess with me by making up someone? Sarah Duffy? Yeah, right. My mind froze. Duffy. He had never said a last name. Where did I get that from? And why did it sound so familiar? What startled me was that I had even put a face to the name. My mind suddenly exploded with pictures and memories. Sarah. She was my best goddamn friend. How the hell did I forget about her? I was clutching my head, gasping for air as everyone in the car looked at me and began yelling at me to calm the hell down. I couldn't calm down though. My mind felt like it was being smashed with a sledgehammer, and the more my memory cleared, the worse it got. Pain, the likes of which I had never experienced before, racked my body as I curled into a ball, shivering and straining to maintain consciousness. The memories continued rushing back into my head, threatening to split my mind in two until suddenly, it was over. I sat up and, bleary-eyed, looked around me. Everyone stared right back at me, terrified. Guys, Sarah Duffy. Please, dear God, tell me you remember her, I practically screamed. Their faces once again switched to anger. God damn it, John, one of the adult chaperones yelled. We thought you were having a seizure or something. If you pull one more stunt like that for the sake of a joke, we'll send you straight home. Are you okay? What the hell was that? I began tearing up. You guys don't know Sarah? She was my best friend. She was your friend, for Christ's sake. I began searching for a specific memory. Kevin, you made fun of her goofy hair, right when she got off the plane in Anchorage. I cried. Please, for the love of God, tell me you remember that. No one said a thing. They all just stared at me with judgmental expressions. That joke has already run its course, Kevin said coldly. Not one of them showed any signs of recognition, but I knew she was real, or had been anyway. What the hell had happened to her? I strained and tried to remember the last time I had seen her, but any recent memories were still elusive and blurry. No matter how hard I tried, all thinking about it did was bring back the headaches and pain. Finally, I was forced to stop or everyone would begin to seriously worry about me again. I just sat in the car for the next several hours of the drive and stared out the window at the bleak gray surroundings as rain ran down the glass. It had been raining since we arrived in Alaska, and it showed no signs of letting up for the next couple of days at least. Finally, we arrived at the entrance to the trail that would take us to the cabin that the other group had stayed at. We unloaded our packs, strapped them on, and set out on our 7-mile hike to where the secluded lakeside cabin lay. It was about 2 in the morning, but since it never really got dark out, our plan was to hike in immediately and get there by 5 so as to have a full day ahead of us. That being said, however, the constant rain and low-set clouds made for poor visibility, and the hike in was a struggle to say the least. Through the thick fog, it was near impossible to even make out a tree branch before it struck you in the face, seemingly out of nowhere. Being mindful of possible grizzly bears, we took care to keep our group loud so as to scare them off. About an hour in, we were all singing Journey at the top of our lungs when I suddenly fell to my knees, and then collapsed to the muddy ground, clutching my head. I had once again been trying to remember when I had last seen Sarah, when it all came flooding back in a horrific wave of grotesque images and unimaginable terrors. There we were, at the Denali campground. The torrential rain pelted down, and the sky was so dark that for the first time since we had been there, it actually seemed like night. Everyone was settling down under the tarp around the campfire, and many people were already asleep in their tents. That's when Jenna asked if anyone had seen Sarah, as she still hadn't washed her dishes. "I'm pretty sure she went to bed already," I said. "I don't want to be creepy, but I'll go check just to be sure." I reluctantly walked away from the warmth of the fire and into the oppressive darkness and driving cold rain. As I approached her tent, I can tell that she wasn't inside as it was unzipped with the door lying wide open. I immediately ran to close it. What an idiot, I thought to myself. The tent is completely soaked inside now. That's when I heard her muffled, agonizing scream. It came from somewhere in the woods surrounding the campground, and I, without thinking, immediately ran into the forest after her. After shoving my way through the thick spruce and willows, I reached a clearing where I could barely see Sarah's body on the ground as some thing, which was mostly obscured by the trees and underbrush, was ripping her open. She was screaming with all of her might, but the thing's bony hooked hand was covering her mouth. Its long fingers curled almost all the way around her head. The sound of her death was horrendous, as bones snapped and skin was peeled away. I wanted to help, but couldn't bring myself to move. Sarah was long dead by the time that I realized that the creature was beginning to wear her. It had hollowed her out and was now sewing her lifeless corpse onto itself. I was still paralyzed with fear when it suddenly turned towards me. Sarah's grotesque, shredded carcass was now horribly reanimated, and it began crawling towards me, like some kind of broken marionette as her dead eyes looked straight ahead, yet saw nothing. I finally broke out of my trance and began frantically sprinting back towards camp. Sarah's corpse could have easily caught me crawling, but the thick underbrush forced it to stand up awkwardly and begin a demented walk in which everything moved all wrong. This, fortunately, gave me enough time to reach the safety of the campfire, although, when I had arrived, I had no idea what I had been running from, or really any of what I had just done. No one asked me if Sarah had really been asleep because none of us knew a Sarah. And that thing, pretending to be her, cringing at the light of the fire, slowly slunk back into the dark of the forest. I bolted upright to people yelling, cursing, and struggling to their feet. I had been near the front of the group, so when I fell to the ground, many people behind me tripped over my body, and then tripped the people behind them. "Oh God, I'm sorry you guys," I cried. The ground is really slick here." Grumbles were heard, and several insults flew my way, but we all eventually got up and continued moving. My mind was racing. The fact that I could remember Sarah when no one else could must have something to do with seeing that creature before it stole her skin. For me, It must have been that initial shock that caused that lapse in memory. It was for the same reason that I could remember Josh while the other kid didn't. My blood froze. He couldn't remember Josh because his memory had blocked the horror from him. Because he had seen Josh being taken in the exact same area in which we were now hiking. And our bear calls were bringing it right to us. Breathing heavily, I slowly turned my head around to look behind me. Sure enough, following from quite a distance and just barely visible in the bleak gray fog, I could see the silhouette of some sort of fucked up human impersonation, grotesquely stumbling along just behind our group, wearing the decaying face of Josh. Its limbs swayed and bent in directions impossible for a human to imitate, and there were seams where the skin split away and was held together with nothing but a few fleshy strands. When the creature saw me looking, it darted away off the path, but I could tell that it was still following us. It was waiting for something. I doubted that it would attack such a large group, and I was sure that no one would believe me, and so I was forced to simply continue hiking. Finally, we reached the cabin, and everyone tried to get some last-minute sleep before we started our day. Everyone but me. I knew that that thing was sulking around in the darkness of the woods surrounding the cabin, waiting for one of us to go out alone. Morning came and everyone quickly prepared for our hike of the day. We would be hiking up a mountain which required some intense bushwhacking just to reach the base, thus realistically making the trip at least 4 hours both ways. We packed our lunches consisting of nothing but protein bars and water, and zipped up our rain gear as the weather was still nothing short of a downpour. The sky remained a depressing gray, and light thunder could be heard rumbling in the distance. That's when someone said what I had been dreading. The worst case scenario. Ashley stepped forward and apologetically said, "Sorry everyone, but I feel just terrible. I think I'll stay behind on this one. You guys go on ahead. I'll stay here at the cabin." "No," I cried. "You have to come with us. We have to stay together." Everyone turned and looked at me. "Jesus, John. If she's not feeling well, let her stay," Pam scolded. I stammered. "That's not it. Fine. I'll stay too." "You don't have to do that, John," Ashley said. "I'll be fine here alone." "No, you won't." I wanted to scream, but I had to calm my nerves. "No, I didn't want to go on this dumb hike anyways," I laughed. "You guys have fun though." Everyone looked at me weirdly, and then glanced at each other, before shrugging and heading off into the woods. I wasn't sure if we would be any safer with just the two of us, but what else could I have done? We would just have to buckle down inside the cabin and hope for the best. As soon as the others disappeared out of sight, I turned to Ashley and said, "All right, we need to get inside the cabin now. I appreciate you staying with me and all, but you're kind of freaking me out," she said. "Sorry," I awkwardly laughed. "It's pretty damn wet out here though. We should really go inside." "Yeah, that's a good plan," she said slowly. "I better lay down for a bit." That's when I saw him, or it, standing 20 or so feet behind Ashley. Josh's decaying corpse, horribly stretched and disfigured in order to cover whatever thing was wearing it. Ashley saw me looking and turned around to let out a strangled squeak. What the fuck is that?" she screamed. I said nothing and simply grabbed her arm, taking off running into the cabin, slamming the door behind us. The thing didn't run after us. Rather, it began slowly walking towards the cabin. It knew we had nowhere to go. I locked the door and scrambled to barricade it with anything I could find. Now there was nothing to do but watch its demented impression of a person as it crawled ever so slowly towards the door. Its hands dragged along the muddy ground, and its fleshy skin hide swayed ever so softly as it staggered. What the hell is that? Ashley kept repeating over and over between her ragged breaths. I don't know, I stammered. I just don't know. What does it want? She screamed as it reached the door and tried the handle. I assume it wants a new coat, I said through clenched teeth. She drew a breath and fell to the ground before looking up at me horrified. The thing moved away from the door and now stood a few inches behind one of the windows, staring in at us. Its cold gaze could be felt from behind the dead eyes of Josh's face, and we could hear skin widening as it smiled. It was messing with us. Ashley broke down again and began weeping. "Leave us alone," she cried. "Get the hell away." The thing did nothing and simply stood there motionless. Then, it slowly lifted up one of its hands and began lightly rapping on the window. A slow, steady rhythm. It had no intention of breaking the window or anything. It just wanted to let us know that it was there. Not that we needed a reminder. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. This continued for several hours as the sunlight slowly faded and the rain and wind picked up. Soon, the sound of it knocking was almost drowned out, and I was having to strain to see it in the dim light. Heavy sheets of water whipped around and obscured its form. At one point, I let my eyes wander for too long, and when I looked back, it was gone. The knocking had stopped. I bolted upright, just in time to barely catch a glimpse of it disappearing around the side of the cabin. "This is bad," I said. "I think it's tired of waiting." Ashley let out a squeal and buried her face in her hands. I wasn't sure if it can get in from somewhere else, but it clearly knew something we didn't. "It's okay," I said, thinking fast, trying to pep talk myself more than anything. "All we need to do is wait for the others to get back. They should be here any minute now." "Who?" Ashley asked. "The rest of our group," I said. "Kevin, Laura, Pam, those guys. Remember?" I don't know who you're talking about," she stated, looking at me puzzled. "It's always just been the two of us." My heart practically stopped, and as I sank to the ground in despair, I began to hear knocks all around the cabin. Have you ever had an experience that suggested that someone else was in your house and just thought, "I don't want to know," and left it? Sometimes, fear of the unknown just seems like the preferable option than facing a real concrete danger. Normally, it's nothing though. One time, the beeper function of my wireless house phone went off when I was the only one at home. It could only be called from the living room. Another time, I swear someone took some change from my desk. They're all probably just slightly disconcerting tricks of the memory. But what would you do when something truly suggestive happens? Would you run, or just ignore it like I did? Last Monday was a normal day. I got up, brushed my teeth, changed into school clothes, all little parts of my morning ritual. It seemed like it would be another totally unnoteworthy day, until I saw the strings. There were 3 or 4 thick twined strings in my room. They crisscrossed between the walls around my bed, one attached to the door. No way would I have missed them before. I should have tripped over them. They were tied to pins in the wall, which had also not existed before 10 seconds ago. Nobody could have been in my room while I was in it, let alone set this up. It was early and my brain wasn't processing correctly. I simply discredited the sight, untied the strings, and left for school, leaving them balled up on my desk. It didn't get any better later. Outside my house, there were hundreds of them, tied between houses, around cars, across streets. This had to have been some super elaborate prank. One of those hidden camera shows or a comedy improv blog. They had gotten everyone else to play along too. Passerbys were tangled in them, tying them to objects they were walking towards or away from, as if they had been and were continuing to follow the course laid out for them. I nervously continued my journey to school. On the bus, everyone except me was tied to the door. At school, groups of friends were tied to each other. Teachers were tied to their desks and boards. Oddly enough, at this point, all I could wonder was why I had been left out. When my friend Lucy sat beside me in first period, she simply plunked her bag down on my lap and rested her chin in her hand, looking right past me to the window outside. "Hey, Lucy." No response. "Come on, I didn't expect you to be in on this too." She sighed and started taking books from her bag. All the books were tied to her hands. I grinned and yanked one of the strings off a book. She didn't seem to notice, instead simply disregarding the book completely, letting it drop to the floor without a moment's hesitation. I leaned down, picking up her book and placing it back on her desk. She took no notice. "Well, if that's how we're gonna play it," I smiled, trying to look playful but really just trying to hide my nervousness. I bundled all the strings attached to her together with one hand, then pulled them all free. She blinked, turning to stare at me. "Holy crap, Martin. You're like a ninja or something." "I've been sitting here for maybe 10 minutes, I smiled, relieved my friend finally noticed me. "Where did all these strings come from?" she gasped, seemingly noticing for the first time. "I assumed you were all fucking with me." She stood up, backing into a corner. No one else in class noticed. "They weren't here just a minute ago. Do you see them too?" Her tone made it clear she was genuinely scared. "No. Didn't you?" I was interrupted by my teacher slamming the door behind her. Everyone except me and Lucy murmured a good morning, and still, no one seemed to pay either of us any notice. "People have been ignoring me all day," I said to Lucy before turning to our teacher. "Hey, dumb bitch, you can't teach for shit." No reaction. "I'm getting away from all this shit." Lucy pulled a few strings aside and left the class. I followed and, surprise, surprise, no one else noticed. We wandered the corridors, leaving and entering classes as we saw fit. Whenever we untied a chair or a book from someone else, it was like it suddenly didn't matter to them. It didn't exist. I showed her the street outside. There were more strings than when I came in this morning, twice as many. We carefully picked our way through the tangle, making our way to a nearby coffee shop. Not particularly grand, I know, but what would you do in our situation? As I said, fear of the unknown sometimes seems like the safer option. On a few occasions, I suggested we untie a few more people. Lucy was opposed to it, remembering how terrified she had been. In the coffee shop, we grabbed a couple of sandwiches and drinks from the fridge. We found a table, untied all strings attached to the chairs, and sat down. We both ate in silence, both of us too scared, both of us distracting ourselves by watching the strangers in the shop, oblivious to the strings. After 20 minutes, Lucy spoke up. "Now she's gonna take that sandwich," she said, pointing at a woman across the shop. Sure enough, she walked to the fridge and took the plastic wrap sandwich she was tied to. She pays for it and leaves. She did so, according to the prophecies of the string. That guy doesn't intend to pay. I watched as a man took his coffee and ran out of the store, the two servers just looking too exasperated to go after him. "This is horrible," she whimpered. "Let's go, please." Outside wasn't much better. Everyone just followed the string's instructions, going about their daily lives. Lucy announced that she was going to go home and sleep this off, and I agreed to walk her home. She only lived 10 minutes away. Away from the busier part of town, there were fewer strings. It was nicer. We could pretend it wasn't happening. When we turned onto Lucy's street, she stopped, her mouth falling open. "What now?" I broke the silence, my voice sounding surprisingly small. "Look." She pointed outside one of her neighbor's houses. I saw it clearly, and I'll take my memory of that moment till the day I die. A little dark imp, maybe 3 feet tall, walking along with its knuckles on the ground, almost like a monkey. It had 2 bulbous yellow eyes taking up about half its face, and no mouth or any other facial features. It was holding up a hammer and a ball of twine, which it was letting out behind it. It walked quickly and quietly from the front door of the house to the mailbox. It stopped, hammered a nail into the side of the box, and tied its string around it. It turned to face us and stopped when it spotted us. My bottom fell out even further than it had already been, but it just stared with a look of surprise and curiosity. You could almost say that it was the more frightened one. Suddenly, it beckoned to us with its tiny hand. I looked at Lucy. She hadn't moved. I looked back at the imp, which stared at me. I halved the distance between us, and then halved it again. This wasn't fear of the unknown anymore. It was fear of this little guy. It didn't seem like anything to be scared of. When I was a meter away from it, it extended its hand. Hi." I shook it. It nodded in approval, blinking its massive yellow eyes up at me. "So, you're the one in charge of the strings?" It nodded eagerly. I called Lucy over, but she stayed where she was. "There are more of you?" Another nod. I wanted to ask it so many questions about what it was and where it came from, but it seemed now that I was stuck with only yes or no questions. Do we even have free will? It just looked at me, almost sadly. I immediately felt sick to my stomach and couldn't bear looking at the little monster anymore. I grabbed Lucy, who had been listening to our exchange, and now sat on the curb with her head in her hands. "Come on." We entered her house, and I made her a cup of tea. When I found her in the living room, she had untied her dog and was curled up with it, crying. I sat the tea down and sat beside her. "I'm so scared," she whispered after a good 10 minutes of sobbing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. "I'm going to sleep," she mumbled suddenly, and was under within the minute. Sleep was starting to sound pretty good all of a sudden. My eyelids suddenly felt like they were being weighed down. I collapsed to the rug, and the last thing I heard before I fell asleep was the scurrying of several sets of little feet nearby. I felt much better the next day, as if the whole affair had been a dream. I probably would have believed that if I hadn't been woken up by Lucy's mother in the morning, wondering what I was doing sleeping over without permission or something. Over breakfast, Lucy asked me why I looked so pale and nervous. I turned to her and smiled, mumbling something to her about feeling sick. But the truth was, I was scared because I couldn't see any strings, and was wondering whether any of my actions were truly my own. In the fall of 1987, local news channel WSB-TV2 of Atlanta, Georgia, was attempting to fill a scheduling gap in their Sunday morning lineup. After a few solicitations by local business owners, they decided to allow the young Reverend Marley Sachs to take the available hour block to do a religiously themed show. It premiered August 18th with little promotion. The show was your standard religious fare and consisted of the Reverend sitting in a simple chair, reading passages from the Bible to the camera and discussing their interpretation and significance to our modern day-to-day life. The show received a reasonable number of viewers and continued to be shown into early December. It was then that the studio began to receive extremely strange complaints from viewers of Words of Light with Reverend Marley Sachs. The calls were from women, and only women, who vaguely referred to uncomfortable feelings they had at very specific intervals during the program. They described feelings of nausea, back pain, dizziness, and blurred vision. These callers, for no discernible reason, were convinced that it was the viewing of this program that was causing these symptoms. It was later determined after 3 weeks of complaints that these feelings were happening at roughly 12-minute intervals during the course of the program. The small studio checked all recording equipment, both audio and video, and found nothing faulty. When the Reverend was made aware of these incidents, he merely shrugged and stated cryptically that some can't handle the voice of God. The head of the studio, at a loss to explain the cause of these complaints, decided to continue running the program. By February, viewership had dropped sharply, and it was decided to pull the plug on the show. The local studio had figured it would be more prudent to spend as much time as possible on the news story that the other two local networks were running, the miscarriage epidemic. Starting sometime in November, the number of healthy pregnant women miscarrying in the Atlanta metropolitan area had reached over 300. The CDC could find no discernible cause of this terrifying occurrence. The Reverend took the show's cancellation with what could only be described as abject indifference. When informed, he made no protest, merely nodded, almost knowingly. He left the studio after the last episode was filmed without so much as a word, and dropped off the face of the earth. No one ever heard from him again, not his former congregation or any member of the church. The studio moved on, filling the slot with an infomercial, and continued to concentrate on the miscarriage story. A year and a half later, an intern at the WSB studios discovered the tapes of the Words of Light and began going through them in an attempt to find stock footage for an upcoming piece the station was doing on the impact of religion on the city. The Atlanta incident, as the miscarriage epidemic became known in medical journals, petered out 3 months after the studio canceled Reverend Sachs' show, and had already begun to fade from the public's consciences. As the intern went through the tapes, he accidentally made a disturbing discovery about the footage. While attempting to stop one recording at 10 minutes and 45 seconds, he mistakenly jammed the fast forward button down. While the footage whizzed by, he attempted to pry up the button with a screwdriver. Just as he succeeded, the tape stopped at 32 minutes and 1 second. The intern actually fell out of his chair when he looked up at what was frozen on the screen. The image of a badly decomposed severed head, filling up the entire frame. After he collected himself, he moved the film back a few frames, then forward, and realized that his mind was not playing tricks on him. He began going through the rest of the recording and soon discovered that at exactly 12-minute intervals, the image would appear for 1 frame. Thinking it was some sort of practical joke being played on the new guy, he presented it to one of the film technicians, ready to be mocked. The technician was just as puzzled as he was. No one had touched the footage since the cancellation of the show. After the studio had closed for the night, the intern convinced the tech to help him go through all the tapes of Words of Light. They discovered that every single episode had the same horrifying anomaly. They also realized that as the show progressed, the image became more and more disgusting, as maggots began to eat away at the loose flesh, and pieces of hair and skin seemed to have fallen off exponentially. The tech made clear to the intern that what they were seeing was technically impossible, since the film itself showed absolutely no signs of splicing, and he himself had been at every filming of the show and knew of no time when this image could have been inserted into frame. All of this was presented to the studio head, who, fearing some kind of backlash over allowing this to get on the air, ordered all the tapes to be destroyed. He told the intern and tech that he had no interest in knowing who did it at this point, only that covering their collective asses is all that's important now. He demanded that they mention this to no one. The tech easily moved on, remembering the incident as a darkly funny personal anecdote, but the intern wouldn't let it go. He made copies of as many tapes as he could before they were wiped, and took them to see if he could find anything else in them that might point out to who did this or why they would. A week later, he attempted to rope the tech into helping him again, saying that he believed that he discovered something even more disturbing than the images themselves. When the single frames were edited together in chronological order, the head's mouth appeared to be moving as if trying to form words. The tech, fearing for his job, told him to get rid of the copies and talk to no one about it. A week later, police responded to a 911 call made by an elderly woman in one of the Atlanta suburbs at dusk. She heard horrible noises coming from her next-door neighbor's house, where a young couple lived. She told the emergency responder that the wife was pregnant and that she was terrified that something had happened. When officers arrived on the scene 20 minutes later, they found no lights on in the window and the front door ajar. They moved in slowly and made their way into the living room. Inside, they found a young woman, dead, with her abdomen slashed open. The wound was jagged, and a trail of blood led from the body to the couch on the far end of the room. There sat her husband, the studio intern, naked, the corpse of his unborn child at his feet, dying. In his hand, he held the rusty piece of metal siding that he had used to gut his pregnant wife. The television was on, and playing an 18-second loop of silent footage of a decomposing head mouthing some unintelligible words. The story at the police precinct to this day goes that the intern kept saying this under his breath, over and over again, as they led him away. The light of God calls them. The light of God calls them. The light of God calls them. You open your eyes, but there isn't anything to see. It's all blank. Whether it's white or black, it doesn't matter. But then, it does. A blinding light fills your eyes, and you squint away. When you open them again, you're in a building. No, not a building. A train. The windows show the scenery outside moving at such speed that you can't even tell what you're passing by. The interior is simple but sophisticated, mostly white, with a few booths set up against the left wall. There is a mirror leaning up against the opposite wall. It stands right in front of you, making it easy to admire yourself. You look sharp in a black and white suit. You return to looking around. As you're looking around, another light flashes in front of you. It isn't as blinding as the last one. It's softer. Once it disappears, there are words in its place. The strange thing is that they aren't facing you. They're backwards to you. You can still read them. Choose your character. After a moment, several smaller lights appear and disappear, leaving in their place several names. Next to you on both sides, the names say locked. You have a name floating in front of you as well. Strangely enough, it's your own. Another few moments of eerie silence pass before a small pinging noise echoes in the train car. You can't move anymore. The train passes into a pitch-black tunnel, and you can't see either. Then, you can't feel anything. It's as if you're floating. When you can see and feel again, you're in front of a wall. Your movements still aren't your own, but it doesn't feel as though an outside force is influencing you either. It's more as though it's all in your subconscious. There are several other kids your age laughing near a gate. They hold a pair of chain cutters. Your mouth opens and you hear yourself say something. Guys, is this really such a good idea? They say this place is really dangerous at night. Your voice is shaking. Oh, don't tell me you're scared. One of them, the one holding the cutters, sticks his tongue out at you. He has white hair and is much bulkier than you. He probably wouldn't have any troubles dealing with any danger that might lay in wait. It's just a bunch of buildings full of mannequins. You find yourself remembering that his name is Rio. The other guy glances over at you sympathetically. He seems much nicer, with longer black hair and a more delicate frame. You think his name is Jay. You can stay behind if you'd like. A third voice butts in. You realize it comes from the right of you. The voice belongs to a tall girl with threateningly pink hair and an aura that you think would be quite intimidating to many people. Yeah, we're coming back tomorrow, right? Stay today, and we'll scout it out and tell you if it's really that dangerous when we get back. You remember her name being Hiru. You agree still somewhat hesitantly with them. Rio gives you a grin and a thumbs up after he cuts the wire, and the others enter. You think he must be nicer than he acts. Then they disappear behind the previously locked gate into the park. The next time you see them is in the pale of the morning, when their bodies, or what's left of them, is being brought out on a gurney. The past week didn't actually happen. You're sure of it. Everyone says it happened, and that you acted fairly normal during it. But everything went black after the incident. You're standing in front of the wall again. This time, it's during the day. You have shivers running down your spine, although whether it's from actual fear or just the fear of the memory, you aren't sure. This world you woke up in, it's strange. There are more words, like there were on the train. Make your way to the ticket house. Is that what you're supposed to do? What ticket house? Why would you need to do that? None of these questions are answered. You find that you aren't in control of your body again. Unlike last time, however, it feels forceful, as though some larger being is manipulating your actions, like you're a puppet. You are made to run through the crowd of people. None of them seem to find it odd. You once again ponder the strangeness of this world, but it doesn't matter. You keep running. You run past guards who are checking through people's bags. They think nothing of it. You decide not to think anything of it either. You run to a building. You finally stop here. You think that this must be the ticket house since that's where the words directed you. More words appear here. Query about the disappearance of your friends. That's right. No one actually ever told you what happened. This time, when the controlling force moves your body again, you go with it gladly. This is information you want to know. You open the door and walk inside. It's empty. You've heard about this place, you think, that it's the only building in this entire park empty of mannequins. It's large. The only other person is a bored-looking lady behind a desk. She wears glasses and has a large stack of papers in front of her. You walk up to her. She barely noticed your presence at first. When she does, she doesn't look surprised. You hear about those kids, right? Weren't you the one that was there that morning? She continues to look bored. You shouldn't worry about it. There are some things that you don't want to know. Now she looks frustrated. That's what the manager told me when I asked. If I were you, kid, I'd heed that advice. You don't want to heed that advice. More words appear above the lady's head. Investigate. She doesn't notice them. How strange. You want her to notice them, but you can't. You're already running away. Out of the building. There's a road that leads towards more buildings. You pass most of the buildings. You see a pure white mannequin in one of the windows. It's wearing a suit. You feel like it's watching you. You keep running. You run until the end of the road. You stop. There are caution signs everywhere. There are guards standing in front of the scene. They won't let you pass. Everything goes dark again. You wake up in front of the park again. It's morning again. You look around. There are more words. Make your way to the ticket house. The force controls your body again. You run to the ticket house. Query about the disappearance of your friends. You walk to the ticket house. The same woman from before sits behind the desk. She looks like she expects you. Investigate. You run to the end of the street again. The guards won't let you pass. Everything goes dark. You wake up in front of the park again. It's morning again. You look around. There are more words. Make your way to the ticket house. The force controls your body again. You run to the ticket house. Query about the disappearance of your friends. You walk into the ticket house. The same woman from before sits behind the desk. She looks like she expects you. She looks annoyed. Investigate. You run to the end of the street. The guards won't let you pass. Everything goes dark. You wake up in front of the park again. It's morning again. You look around. There are more words. The force controls your body again. You run to the ticket house. Query about the disappearance of your friends. You walk into the ticket house. The same woman from before sits behind the desk. She looks like she expects you. She looks furious. Investigate. You run to the end of the street. The guards won't let you pass. Everything goes dark. You wake up in front of the park again. It's morning again. You look around. There are no more words. The force controls your body again. You run to the ticket house. There are no words. You walk into the ticket house. The same woman from before stands behind the desk. She looks like she expects you. She looks furious. There are no words. You run to the end of the street. The guards let you pass. You look underneath a large blue tarp. There's red. So much red. And everything goes dark. You wake up in front of the park again. It's morning again. You look around. There are more words. Make your way to the ticket house. The force controls your body again. You run to the ticket house. Query about the disappearance of your friends. You walk into the ticket house. The woman is gone. Investigate. You run to the end of the street again. The guards are gone. You look underneath the large blue tarp. There's red, fresh and old, a pair of glasses, some papers, and a mannequin hand. Everything goes dark. You wake up in the ticket house. There are so many other people there. They look so scared. So scared. What kind of world is this? What's happening to you? You look around. There are more words. Investigate. You investigate. There's an official-looking man standing in front of the door. He looks at his watch worriedly. You ask what time it is. 10 p.m. Why are there so many people here so late? They lock the gates. He simply nods. You want to question him further, but it looks like he'd have no answers. All windows are barred off. You can't see outside. Another woman pulls you aside. The mannequins. The mannequins? I can't tell you. Then why pull me aside? Because you can fix it. Fix what? I can't tell you. Then how am I supposed to fix it? You have to go outside. The door is locked. There's another way. What way? I can't tell you. You must, or I won't do it. I mustn't. You must. You must. Upstairs. Upstairs? That's all I can say. With that, she disappears. You realize that you have lost control of your body again. More words have appeared. Make your way upstairs. You look around the crowd of frightened people as you run through them. They ignore you. You run to the other end of the building. You are behind the desk. The lady isn't there. She's dead. What kind of world is this? You turn towards the black wall. There's a door. It isn't locked. You walk through it. There's a staircase on the opposite side. You begin walking up the staircase. It takes forever. You reach the top. There's another door. You open it. The room behind it is pitch black. You turn on the lights. How did you know where the light switch was? You aren't sure. There are mannequins. So many of them. But they're all broken, beaten, battered, and out of place amongst the clean environment. Some of them are dirty with soil, mud, charring, marker marks, and red. The same red. That red. None of them move. They are regular mannequins. Why is this surprising? All is quiet. You walk through the room. Still none move. They remain regular mannequins. You want to go home. Where is home? The first thing you remember is that train. You want to go back to that train. Before the words, before the tunnel. Just the train and its car. You've reached the end of the room. There's another door. You realize that this door must lead out onto the porch. What porch? Someone forgot to lock it. You don't want to open it. You open it anyways. The mannequins remain still. The door closes behind you. You try to open it again. It is locked now. Why did it lock? You regret your decision. Outside, it's eerily quiet. You don't like it. Why do you keep moving forward? You don't want to move. Why can't you control yourself? What is controlling you? You jump to the ground below. Somehow, you remain unbroken. There is nothing there, but the faint light seeping outside from the ticket house. You remember your friends, Hiru, Rio, and Jay. Perhaps they aren't dead. Perhaps this is a dream. You turn towards the only other building that doesn't line the road. It's the control house of the park's transportation system. It's unlocked. You go inside. The system is online. You can't imagine why. There's a single harness swinging slightly at the boarding station. It seems to be waiting. You look around. No one else is there. You climb into the harness. It starts moving along the wire, like it normally would during the daytime. Why did you do this? You try to get out, before it exits the house and moves into the sky. You can't move your body. It's dark outside. So dark. At least you are far above the height of a human being, or a mannequin. You wonder why your mind added mannequin to that sentence. It shouldn't have needed to. The ground seems like a dangerous place. You want to cry. The wire edges closer to the ground. You wanted to go back up. Soon, you were passing by the buildings on the road. The lights are on inside. The mannequins, the ones that usually line their interior, are gone. All of them. How were they brought away so quickly? They were just there yesterday. No, not yesterday. The last time you woke up. And they weren't there then. Not all of them. Some of them were missing. The suited mannequin that watched you the first day was missing. You realize that the end of the street is approaching. You don't want to approach it. You want to go back. You want to be able to look inside the windows. You don't want to get off this contraption. It was the only thing that kept you safe. Kept you safe? From what? More words appeared. Save the girl. Save? The girl? Save what girl? You passed the words and could no longer see them. They could not answer your questions anyways. You have reached the end of the street. No one is there. The tarp is gone. So is the red, and the glasses, and the papers, and the white plastic hand. Suddenly, you were on the ground. How did you get out of the harness? How did you fall so far without breaking? What kind of world is this? Did you even fall? You look around. There is a girl now. She wears a frilly dress. She looks at you with frightened eyes. You realize that the words must have been referring to her. You want to help her now, but from what? There is nothing around. She suddenly screams. She's swallowed up by something white. You failed to save her. That's the first task you have failed. There's a mannequin in her place. It wears a frilly dress. It's looking at you. You can tell. It does nothing. More words appear above it. Save the guard. Find the mannequin. The mannequin? It's right in front of you. You've already found it. Perhaps it was talking about another mannequin. Why did you need to find it? You realize you don't want to find it. Finding it is a horrible idea. You look back at the mannequin. It isn't a mannequin anymore. It's a perfect copy of the little girl. But you know it isn't her. Her skin is too white. Her eyes are too blank. She's the mannequin now. You're scared. You feel yourself begin to run. It's dark. You can't see where you're walking. You stop running. Why did you stop running? You want to keep running. You want to go back to the train. If you kept running, you would have. You would have won. You can feel it. But you stopped running. What would you have won? Why did you stop? You blink. There's a mannequin there. You wonder how it got there so fast. It wasn't there a split second ago. It wears the same outfit one of the guards wore. You realize it isn't looking at you. You turn around. One of the guards is there. How did he get there? He looks fearful. He looks at you. You have to save him. What will happen if you don't? It's too late. Something white swallows him. The mannequin stands in his place. You don't want to watch. More words appear above it. Save the waitress. Find the mannequin. The waitress? You turn to the side. You already know what happened. If you looked back at the mannequin, you would be a white-skinned replica of the man. You don't want that to happen to anyone else. A bell sounds midnight. It's dark. You enter the closest building. Its lights are on. A lady stands there. She looks like she's hiding from something. She's wearing a typical waitress garb. As soon as you enter, she looks both furious and tearful. You realize your entrance would have given away her location. You apologize. You will save her. But you don't. The mannequin finds you both. It consumes her. You didn't know what to do. It looks at you. This time, you can't help but watch as it slowly changes. This is the third task you failed. More words appear. Find the mannequin. Save yourself. Why would you want to find the mannequin? Perhaps if you find it before it finds you, it'll go away. Why would a mannequin be looking for you? You realize that if each of these three people had a mannequin looking for them, then you begin to run. Out of the building, up the street, towards that one building. That one where you saw it, where it watched you from. That's where it'll be. You arrive. You look around. It's there. You know it. It was waiting. It wants you to win. A voice calls out to you. You turn around. A white-skinned figure stands there, but it isn't a mannequin. Not anymore. Two figures stand beside it. One of them has white hair. He wears a sarcastic smile. One of them has long black hair. He seems welcoming. The third has threatening pink hair. She grins. It's too late for them. It's too late for you. You suddenly have full control of your body. For the first time since the train, you are you and only you. You whip around. They distracted you. This was their plan all along, you realize. It's too late for them. It's too late for you. The suited mannequin stands there. You didn't find it. It found you. If it could grin, it would be. It's too late for them. This was no one's fault but your own. If you had stopped them, none of any of this would have happened. The mannequin approaches. It's too late for you. You scream. Red is all you can see. That and two words. The words. It was all in the words, you realize. Pain. So much of it. What is this world? Why were you in it? Could you really have stopped any of it? Soon, the pain fades away. You are the mannequin now, you realize. You don't mind too much. You can still see the words. Game over. I don't really remember what happened before it all went dark. I think I was in the car. All I can remember was the loud noise, some screech of metal on metal, and then nothing. I woke up in this beeping place. I'm not sure where I am because I can't seem to open my eyes. Silly, isn't it? I definitely feel the blanket on top of me and the beep 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 beside me, but I can't open my eyes or talk or move. People come to poke at me every now and then, and I always try to talk to them. Can someone tell me what's happened to my eyes? I can't open them. I try to say, but my vocal cords don't seem to want to cooperate, so I guess I'll just wait. These people seem to know what they're doing. They poke in the same places every time, sometimes with their fingers, sometimes with a sharp thing with no name. They don't say much, these people. Just come, poke, sigh, and go. Someone opened my eye today and held a flashlight over it. It hurt and I couldn't tell them to stop, but just the movement of my eye felt amazing. Did you know that if you don't open your eyes for a long time, they can stick to your eyelids? I didn't. I do now. It didn't hurt though. It just felt good when it was unstuck. Someone has been holding my hand and reading me stories. There's 7 chapters into Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets now. I'd tell them that I've already read them, but I can't. They hold my hand sometimes and just sit with me, so it's just me, them, and the beep beep beep. I think it's my mom. She was crying today. I wanted to make her happy and not sad, but something's definitely wrong with my arms because I couldn't hug her better. I'll have to tell her when I can that I wanted to help. Some people came into the room while Mom was crying, said that she should leave, that she shouldn't be here for this. But I didn't recognize the voice, and I didn't want my mom to go. I was scared. She cried louder, said no, He's still there. And I wanted to shout, "Of course I am. Where would I have gone?" And then everyone left. Mom came back after a bit later, sniffling. She sat down and started crying a little bit louder and louder until she almost started screaming. And then she hit me right in the face. I couldn't tell what I'd done wrong, but she hit me again and again and again, and I couldn't say sorry or cry or stop her, only sit there until men came and took her away. Two of the men stayed though, and they were mumbling, and I couldn't make out what they were saying until I caught the word coma. I wanted to scream, shake, jump up and slap him in the mouth, but I couldn't. I couldn't say stop. Couldn't say please, I'm here. I can hear you, please don't do this. Nothing. I could only sit there while they poked me with the sharp thing with no name. That must be a needle. The beep 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 turned into a beep beep, and I felt myself getting tired. I wanted to ask what they were doing, what they thought it would help to slow the beeping down, but I couldn't. I was screaming at the top of my lungs, but I wasn't moving. I don't want to die. I don't want to fade away. I need to hug Mom. Tell her everything's okay. Tell her I'm here and I'm fine. But I don't think I'll get the chance now. Beep, beep. Dark, cold and eerie. Those are the only words I can come up with to describe the house in which I had lived with my family for a majority of my life. Mostly dark, blistering cold during the winter, and always eerie. Sometimes there would be strange noises coming from the cellar too. It had often given me the creeps, though I would never admit that to my mother. I'd figured I was too old to let some silly noises scare me anyway. I had been trying to act like a man of the house ever since my dad left when I was 7. I had always hoped that I would never turn out like my father, whom I've hated with a burning passion. As far as he goes, I suppose I'd better just leave it at that. I lived in the house with my mother, Linda, and my uncle Kevin, on a vast piece of land in Steinen, Indiana. Steinen was a tiny piece of shit in the middle of nowhere. Nobody liked living there. I didn't have any friends because I was homeschooled, and I'd never even seen another kid my age in Steinen, since we almost never left the house unless Mom wanted to go into town to buy groceries. However, I was always very close to Uncle Kevin. When I was little, he would tell me ghost stories right before bed, which my mother always hated. "Stop it, Kevin. You're going to give him nightmares," she would snap. Oh, I did get nightmares indeed, and sometimes it seemed as though the nightmares refused to end. They crept into the back of my mind like a spider crafting its web. The story he told most often was one about a monster with a contorted body and black eyes. According to the legend, as Kevin called it, even though I knew he made it up himself, the monster would come into your room if you were awake past your bedtime and hide in your closet, watching you the whole night. Of course, this was just a silly little tale that Kevin would tell me so I wouldn't stay up late. Even so, I can't tell you how many times that horrible creature has popped into my head over the years. On this particular night, I decided to go to bed early in an attempt to sleep off a pounding headache. I lied down on my icy bed and sank underneath the covers, hiding my face from whatever may have been lurking inside my head. After setting my glasses down on the nightstand beside my bed, I reached over and flicked the light off. The darkness made me feel alive, in a very strange way, almost as though I was mesmerized by the nothingness. As I looked around the room, seeing almost nothing but the pitch black darkness surrounding me, I felt entranced, as if something was forcing me to look. Of course, there was nothing to look at least not with the eyes. This was something you could only witness within the deepest corridors of your mind, the part of your mind that you always dread visiting and can never seem to return from. Out of nowhere, I began to hear scratches upon the window above my bed. My eyes immediately burst open, and I felt like I was unable to close them again. What the fuck was that? I asked myself. Nothing, of course. It was nothing. It couldn't have been anything, right? Right? Just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. No big deal. But in a moment of childish curiosity, I decided to peer out the window, just to make sure I was hearing nothing more than a tree branch brushing up against the glass. But then it hit me like a bag of bricks. There is no tree next to my window. Still, I decided it would be better to sleep it off and think more about it in the morning. It was probably all in my head. It had to be. I found it unusually difficult to fall asleep that night, as if somebody or something was trying to keep me up. I woke up the next morning with that sound still locked in my brain. It had to have been coming from somewhere. But where? Shit. I had no idea. But then I remembered. The cellar. I built up as much courage as I could muster and slowly crept down into the abyss. Jesus. I hadn't been down there in a year, maybe longer. I had almost forgotten what it looked like. Nothing but clouds of cobwebs and stacks of cardboard boxes shoved against walls. I rustled through a couple of boxes until I stumbled upon a picture I'd drawn when I was a child. It was a sketch of a grotesque creature. It definitely wasn't human. This thing barely even had a face, just dark black eyes and no mouth. Its body was tall and thin, and was contorted into a shape that I had never even seen before. The more I looked at the drawing, the more I reminded myself of that story that my uncle used to tell me. It appeared to be raining above the creature, and toward the bottom of the paper I had scribbled, "Please stay awake," in giant letters. I didn't know what the hell that was supposed to mean, but I folded up the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. I quickly made my way up the staircase into the kitchen and went about my day as usual, keeping that drawing in mind, trying to remember what it meant and why I'd drawn it in the first place. I looked outside and noticed that it had begun to rain again. I didn't want to think about the creature any longer, so I walked into my dimly lit room and plopped onto my bed. I fell asleep before I even knew it. When I awoke, it was exactly 3 a.m. This night was colder and darker than usual. The farm was soaked with rain from earlier in the evening. The moon was full and radiant. It almost didn't look real. For an instant, I glanced out my bedroom window, and I could swear I saw something quickly walking through the yard. When it spotted me, it slunk behind a tree, as if it were trying to hide from me. It looked exactly like what I had drawn when I was a child. I ran into Uncle Kevin's room and began shaking him awake. "Kevin! Kevin!" He rubbed the room out of his eyes. "What's up, bud? It's late," he asked, bewildered at my excitement. I looked him in his bloodshot eyes and softly said, "I saw someone in the yard." Kevin looked at me with hesitation. "No, you probably just saw an animal. Get back to bed." I know what I saw. This was no animal, or at least, not one that I'd ever seen. Not even in my worst fucking nightmares. I knew I couldn't tell him exactly what I had seen, as he would never believe me. "No, Kevin. It was not an animal, please. It was a man. I think. Look, just please go out and check." Uncle Kevin leapt up and grabbed a shotgun from under the bed. All right, come on. Show me where he is. Let's try not to wake your mom. I'll scare the fucker off. We went outside, and I pointed to the tree. I whispered to Kevin, I saw him go behind that tree. My uncle bravely walked up to the tree and peered around it. Nothing. He searched the entire farm for well over half an hour, but he never did find anything. Let's go back in, bud. There's no one out here. Keep the doors locked tonight. He was wrong. I knew there was something out there. I crawled into bed and threw the covers over my face. I could hear the blistering wind coming in from outside. It pierced my ears with a whistle that I only thought the dogs could detect. Suddenly, I heard a tapping sound on my window. The sound grew louder with each tap. I tightened the blankets around my body. The taps slowly turned into knocks. Louder and faster the knocks became. The knocks turned into bangs. I thought the glass was going to break. Then, out of nowhere, it stopped. No more taps. No more knocks. No more bangs. No more wind. I was relieved. Suddenly, I heard a low, chilling voice in my ear. Please stay awake. It couldn't be. No, it couldn't be. I ran into the hallway, ready to make my way to my mother's room when I saw it. Whatever it was, I still don't know. It was holding Kevin's lifeless, mangled body in its arms. Carved deeply into my uncle's torso were the words, "Please stay awake." I tried to let out a scream, but only silence filled the dead air. I sprinted through the door of my mother's bedroom and saw her body lying in the middle of the floor. She was covered in blood and her left arm had been ripped straight out of its socket. Written next to her, in her own blood, were the words, "Please stay awake." I began to sob, and when I turned around, the creature was gone. I don't know where the hell it went, and I'm not sure I want to. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could and let out the loudest scream I could muster. I called the police and lied down in the cold, now blood-soaked floor, waiting for them to arrive. It felt like hours. Finally, the police showed up to find me in the fetal position next to my mother's corpse. I told them everything I saw. I showed them my drawings. I told them about the taps, the knocks, the bangs. I told them what I'd seen outside, but of course, they wouldn't hear a word of it. Why would they? All they could see was a lonely kid hovering over his dead mother, her blood covering my clothes almost as much as it covered the floor. It's cold in this cell. It's dark and lonely. The silence is the only saving grace. Constant, peaceful silence. Tonight it's raining outside. It's colder, darker, and wetter than ever. But, unfortunately, I must stop writing now. I just heard a tap on my window. When I was a small child, I was terrified of the dark. I still am, but when I was around 6 years old, I couldn't go a full night without crying out for one of my parents to search beneath my bed or in my closet for whatever monster I thought was waiting to eat me. Even with a nightlight, I would still see dark shapes moving around the corners of the room, or strange faces looking in on me from my bedroom window. My parents would do their best to console me, telling me that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light. But in my young mind, I was positive that the second I fell asleep, bad things would get me. Most of the time, I would just hide under the blankets until I became tired enough to stop worrying. But every now and then, I would become so panicked that I would run screaming into my parents' room, waking up my brother and sister in the process. After an ordeal like that, there would be no way anyone would be getting a full night's rest. Eventually, after one particularly traumatizing night, my parents had had enough. Unfortunately for them, they understood the futility in arguing with a 6-year-old and knew that they would be unable to convince me to rid myself of childish fears through reason and logic. They had to be clever. It was my mother's idea to stitch together my little bedtime friend. She collected a large assortment of random pieces of fabric and used her sewing machine and created what I would later refer to as Mr. Ickbarr Bigelsteine, or Ick for short. Ick was a sock monster, as my mother called him. He was made to keep me safe while I slept at night by scaring away all the other monsters. He was pretty damn creepy, I had to admit. Honestly, looking back on it all now, I'm still impressed that my mom could think of something so strange and disturbing looking. Ickbarr had the stitched together look of a Frankenstein gremlin, with big white button eyes and floppy cat ears. His little arms and legs were made from a pair of my sister's black and white striped socks, and the half of his face that was green was made up of one of my brother's tall football socks. His head could have been described as bulbous, and for his mouth, my mom attached a piece of white fabric and sewed in a zigzag pattern to shape a wide grin of sharp teeth. I loved him at once. From then on, Ick never left my side, so long as it was after dusk, of course. Ick didn't like the sun, and he would get upset if I tried to bring him to school with me. But that was okay. I only needed him at night to keep the boogeymen away, which was what he was good at. So every night at bedtime, Ick would tell me where the monsters were hiding, and I would place him near that section of my room closest to the spookiness. If there was something in the closet, Ick would block the door. If there was a dark creature scratching at my window, Ick would be pressed up against the glass. If there was a big hairy beast under my bed, then under the bed he went. Sometimes the monsters weren't even in my room. Sometimes they would hide in my dreams, and Ickbarr would have come with me into my nightmares. It was fun bringing Ick into my dream world, as he and I would spend hours fighting off ghouls and demons. The best part was, in my dreams, Ick could talk to me for real. "How much do you love me?" he would ask. "More than anything," I would always tell him. One night, in a dream, after I had lost my first tooth, Ick asked me for a favor. "Can I have your tooth?" I asked him why. "To help me kill the bad things," he said. The next morning at breakfast, my mom asked me where my tooth went. From what she told me, the tooth fairy didn't find it under my pillow. When I told her that I gave it to Ickbarr, she just shrugged and went back to feeding my little sister. From then on, every time I lost a tooth, I would give it to Ick. He would always thank me, of course, and tell me that he loved me. Eventually, though, I ran out of baby teeth, and I was beginning to get a little too old to be still playing with dolls. So Ick just sat there on my bookshelf collecting dust, slowly fading away from my attention. Over time, the nightmares, however, became worse than ever. So bad that they even began to follow me into the waking world, terrorizing every dark corner or rustle in the bushes. After one particularly bad night biking home from a friend's house where I swore a pack of rabid dogs were chasing me, I got home to find something strange waiting for me in my room. There, on my bed, standing fully upright in the soft glow of the moonlight from my window, was Ickbarr. At first, I just thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. They had been all evening, so I tried to flick on the lights. Another flick of the light switch, then another, and another, with no change to the darkness. It was then that I started to get nervous. I backed away slowly towards the door behind me, my eyes never leaving the shape of Ick's silhouette. my hand awkwardly outstretched behind reaching the doorknob. I was just about to get my ass out of there when I heard the door slam itself shut, locking me into blackness. In nothing but shadows and silence, I stood frozen in place, not even breathing. For how long? I can't say, but after what felt like a lifetime of cold fear, I heard the shrill, familiar voice. You stopped feeding me, so why should I protect you? Protect me from what? Let me show you. I blinked once, and everything changed. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. It wasn't hell, but the comparison wasn't far off. It was some sort of forest, a horrible, nightmarish place where partial embryonic abortions hung from the canopy, and the ground swarmed with carnivorous insects. A thick fog wafted through the air, and with it, the stench of rotting meat, while chartreuse lightning flashed across the night sky. In the distance, I could hear the agonizing screams of something not quite human. My head throbbed like it was about to explode, the pain forcing out a river of tears. In my mind, I heard his voice again. This is what your reality would become without me. I felt earth-shaking footsteps approaching fast. I'm the only one who can stop it. It was behind me now, huge and angry, hot breath across my back. Bring me what I need, and I will. I woke up before I could turn around. The following day, I raided my parents' closet for my brother's baby teeth, giving them all to Ickbarr. Almost immediately, the night terror ceased, and I was more or less able to go on about my life as normal. From time to time, I would have to sneak into my little sister's room and snatch what was meant for the tooth fairy, or strangle one of the neighborhood cats and pry out its sharp incisors. Anything to ward off the visions. Anything from a shark-tooth necklace to a cavity ridden bicuspid. I also began to notice that it would move about my room whenever I left for any length of time, rearranging my stuff and hanging additional curtains. He was even beginning to look more lifelike somehow. In the right light, his teeth would glisten, and he was warm to the touch. As much as he creeped me out, I couldn't work up the courage to just destroy him, knowing perfectly well where that would leave me. So I went on collecting teeth for Ick throughout all of high school and college. The older I got, the more things I would learn to fear, the more teeth Ick would need to keep me safe. I'm 22 years old now, with a decent job, my own apartment, and a set of dentures. It's been almost a month since Ick's last meal, and the horrors are starting to crowd around me once more. I took a detour through a parking garage after work tonight, found a man fumbling with his car keys. His teeth were stained yellow from a lifetime of cigarettes and coffee. Even still, I had to use a hammer to get out the molars. When I got back to my apartment, he was waiting for me, on the ceiling, in the corner, 2 white eyes, and a mouth of razors. How much do you love me? He asks. More than anything, I reply, taking off my coat. More than anything in the world. I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remembered during a particularly vicious era when the bombings rarely stopped. I would stay at home sitting in front of my television, watching a very, very strange show. It was a kids' show that lasted 30 minutes and contained strange and sinister images. To this day, I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on the part of the media to use scare tactics to keep kids in place, because the moral of every episode revolved around very uptight ideologies. Stuff like, bad kids stay up late, bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep, and bad kids steal food from the fridge at night. It was very weird and in Arabic to top it off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every episode. The camera would zoom in on an old rusted closed door. As it got closer to the door, strange and sometimes even agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then, a text would appear on the bottom of the screen in Arabic reading, "That's where bad kids go." Eventually, both the image and the sound would fade out, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 or 16 years later, I became a journalistic photographer. That show had been in my mind all my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually, I'd had enough and decided to go do some research. I finally managed to uncover the location of the studio where much of the channel's programming had been recorded. Upon further research and eventually traveling on site, I found out it was now desolate and had been abandoned after the big war ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burnt out from the inside. Either a fire had broken out, or someone wanted to incinerate all of the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studio and snapping pictures, I found an isolated, out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to break the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood, feces, and tiny bone fragments laid scattered across the floor. It was a small room and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me, though, what made me turn away and never want to come back, was the bolted caged microphone hanging from the roof in the middle of the room. Alone. You never have thought of the concept alone before, but as you are in bed, unable to sleep, your mind starts to wander. You think about what you did or what you're going to do tomorrow. Then you start to think about darker subjects you wish you had never thought of. You wonder if you are the only one in your house awake at this hour. You wonder if you are the only one awake in your room. Right there, you hear small and subtle creaks in your kitchen. Right away, you pass it off as the wind. But then, you hear it again. This time, you know it can't be. I mean, just a second ago, there was no wind but a breeze. Maybe you're imagining it. Yeah, it has to be that. I mean, no one else is awake and you're certain you locked the door. Minutes seem like hours and you hear the creak again. But this time, it seems closer. How could it? Your imagination and mind are playing tricks. I mean, you live in a good neighborhood. There's never any crime here. Your thoughts are cut off mid-sentence as you hear the noise which seems to be just out your door. Without hesitation, you throw your heavy comforter over your head to protect you. You're breaking out in a cold sweat, thinking over and over again, there's nothing here. Then, you hear the small, somewhat non-existent creak of your door. The sound rips through your mind for what seems like hours. You want to check, but if you do, you can meet face to face with someone or something. So, you just shut your eyes as tight as you can, trying as hard as you can to just go to sleep. Just leave this nightmare. Hours go by without a single noise. Your heartbeat is slowing and down. You start to think how stupid you were to think something was there. As you lift your covers off, you freeze and just hear one last thing. You shouldn't be up. His face never changes. It's pale white. His eyes are gray, empty, wide, so fucking wide. I can't take my own eyes off of them because I can't. I feel them painfully dry up, just as his should. But they don't. He never closes them. He's always watching. His smile, that godforsaken smile, just like his eyes, so impossibly wide. His teeth aren't touching. It's an open smile. I can see the black pit where his throat begins, always waiting for something sinister to crawl out. His teeth clamp down just as I think I can see something moving behind them. They're sharp, but why are they spotted with red? He's always there. His aberrant long fingers leave my windows steamed up in their shape. He'll stroke the glass a few times, but that's only before he'll start impatiently tapping it with each of his 5 individual yellow pungent nails. Consecutive taps starting from pinky to thumb. He's waiting for me to look away, but I can't. What will he do if I look away? I can't sleep. I might not make it until morning if I fall asleep now. Just keep watching. He won't do anything if I keep watching. My eyes are getting heavy. I don't know how much longer I can stay awake. My lids are fluttering so much. It's like watching an old film. Watching him fade slowly in and out of frame. Black. I closed my eyes. I realized after a mere 2 seconds, but it seems it's too late. I'm staring at an empty window. I could see where he huffed his warm breath against the thin, transparent panel, but it didn't last in the cold. The formed condensation slowly disappears, and as does my previous minuscule sense of security. Even if I'd been tired, I'm awake now, trembling. My body feels like it's both been set aflame and buried with ice. I feel so numb that I can't move. My wide eyes form tears and I start to cry. I can't stop, though I'm as silent as I can manage. My teeth grit to hold in my pathetic whimpers, the strain proving too much for my head. It's throbbing with pain. I want to cry out, but I can't. I keep my eyes open, staring forward from the wooden wall that I was backed up into, glaring to the window. Being able to see him there had been some source of comfort, but now he's gone. Where is he? I'm scared. I sit, tucking my knees close to my pounding chest. I bring up my nerve-rattling hands to bury my eyes into them, rubbing them dry. For a second, I can't see. I feel something brush against my shoulder, leaving my heart to sink and my cries to drown silent. I'm hesitant, but I remove my hands from my eyes until I stare into my lap. It's so quiet that I can hear my own shuddering breath, as if it were the loudest thing I'd ever been able to hear. I eventually turn my head to look at the floor at my side. Nothing. Click. Just when I thought I'd been feeling my worst, I let out another baffled whimper, having a hand swipe away a single tear that sprinted along my flustered cheek. My eyes move across the floor and towards the door, leading to the passageway. It's cracked open. I wait for it to be pushed open further, the anticipation making me nauseous. Ah, there. Pale, but dirty, and familiar aberrant fingers protruded from the side of the slightly opened entryway. They tapped onto the wood just above the golden turning handle, consecutively, from pinky to thumb. I watched his fingers with eyes that grow dim. Although I'm scared, I've accepted my fate. I can't be saved. I muster a sarcastic, short laugh at my misfortune, softly banging the back of my head into the wall I leaned back against. I give up. I close my eyes. I've never been a very sociable kid. To be completely honest, I've never really seen the point of it. People talk about the same things over and over again. Meaningless things. The weather, the weekend, work, school. As I've gotten into my late teens, I've grown to loathe it. Whenever I hear the kids in my classes or in the halls talking about the same old crap and giggling, my blood boils. People avoid me mostly, which can be expected. A few of the more brutish kids pick on me, but I just ignore them. I spend my weekends alone, indoors. I like to play the piano in my spare time. It's very therapeutic. It's like my meditation. When I'm playing it, I usually think about life. I think about people and my general dislike towards them. I think about the kids who pick on me at school, and I think about the recent disappearance of kids in my surrounding area. They were all kids of similar age to myself, mostly girls, some even from my school, my classes. There have been 8 in total. I've been keeping track of them, you see. I follow their stories in the newspapers quite closely. I'm very keen on what the police find at their scene, and always keep an eye out for any evidence they find that might lead them to the killer. The profiles are always the same. They are usually discovered in back alleys, or in ditches, always with their throats slit in a clean and precise manner. The curious part that the police can't seem to figure out is why the victims always have their tongues removed, ripped out from their jaws, and I quote the newspaper when I say this, while the victims were still alive. They say it's the worst serial killing that they've seen in the country for years. The killer is calm, meticulous, and leaves not one shred of evidence at the crime scenes. Whatever the reason, my classes have been getting noticeably quieter as the noisiest of the kids all one by one have gone missing, only to be found days later, mutilated and dumped, as if they were trash. It's so much more pleasant. I can concentrate properly now. There's still one girl in my class though, who really grinds my gears with her high-pitched whiny voice, and that piercing laugh that seems to penetrate deep into my skull every time I have the displeasure of hearing it. I heard her again today, loud and irritating as usual, and couldn't help thinking that she used that tongue of hers way too much. I might even go as far to say that she didn't deserve to have it at all.